The storm over Virelin Ridge was merciless, tearing at the clouds like claws of a beast. Lightning flashing across the sky as if the heavens were warning of something worse to come. And through that storm, the Arvanthian royal cruiser burned like a falling star, spiraling down in a trail of smoke and flame, engines screaming in protest as the sleek silver ship smashed through the dense canopy of black-barked trees, before crashing into the rocky slope below with a thunderous roar. Inside the wreckage, Princess Shale lay half-conscious, her lavender skin smeared with blood, her silver and violet robes torn, and the crystal crown that marked her status cracked and glowing dimly. She tried to move, but pain lanced through her side where a metal shard had pierced her armor, and outside she could hear faint shouting her guards. Perhaps, or the rebels who had attacked the ship, but no one came to her aid. Moments later, silence fell like a shroud, and she realized, with growing dread, that she had been left behind, abandoned in the wreck while the rest of her crew fled or died. Weak and bleeding, she dragged herself from the shattered hull and crawled toward the edge of the crash site, smoke curling around her as the ship's energy core hissed and flickered dangerously. And as the daylight began to fade, she collapsed near a rock, gasping for breath, the cold dirt against her cheek the last thing she felt before everything went dark until a shadow fell over her. And she blinked against the dimming light to see a shape tall, broad, wrapped in rough fabrics, and carrying a strange, old-fashioned rifle across his back. For a moment, her heart raced in panic, thinking the rebels had returned. But then the figure knelt beside her and gently turned her over, his face half hidden beneath a visor and tangled beard, his voice low and steady, speaking a language she barely understood, but somehow found comforting. "You're not from around here, are you?" he said, his tone calm but curious. Then he lifted her carefully, with surprising ease, as if he had done this 100 times before, and carried her into the trees, away from the smoldering wreck and whatever danger still lingered behind. His steps, sure and quiet, despite the rough terrain, and as she slipped in and out of consciousness, she caught glimpses of strange devices strapped to his belt, crude tools that seemed out of place in this world, scraps of alien tech pieced together with raw human grit. Finally, they reached a small shelter built into the side of a rock wall, hidden beneath layers of vines and camouflage netting, and inside, the man laid her gently on a narrow bed and began to work quickly, pulling out medical supplies that looked old, mismatched, but strangely effective. Shell tried to speak, to ask who he was, but her voice was a whisper, and he simply nodded as if he already understood, as if he had seen injuries like hers before and didn't need words to act. Outside, the wind howled through the ridge like a beast mourning the dead. And inside the cave, the soft hum of a power cell and the sharp smell of disinfectant filled the air as the human worked through the night, treating the princess with a quiet patience that no soldier or royal medic had ever shown her. And even as her vision blurred and she drifted toward sleep, she kept her eyes on him, this stranger, this unexpected human who had no reason to help her, no benefit to gain, and yet here he was, patching her wounds and watching the door with a worn plasma pistol in hand, ready to protect someone he didn't even know. And for the first time in her life, Shell, heir to the throne of 1,000 star systems, felt powerless but strangely safe in the presence of the one being her people had always dismissed as primitive, wild, and forgettable, because if this was what humanity truly was, then perhaps the galaxy had made a terrible mistake in underestimating them. When Princess Shell opened her eyes again, the air smelled like metal, smoke, and something warm-cooked meat, maybe, and, for a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that her body ached and her side burned where the wound had been closed with a strange mixture of alien paste and coarse stitching. And then she remembered the crash, the fire, the fear, and finally the face of the human who had pulled her from the wreck and carried her to safety. She turned her head slowly and saw him crouched near a small fire at the edge of the cave, tending a makeshift pot as steam rose into the cool morning air, his back to her, muscles shifting under a patched jacket that looked like it had survived more battles than most soldiers. Her throat felt dry, and she made a small sound, trying to speak, and he turned quickly, not with alarm, but with calm readiness. His eyes sharp and steady as he walked over and checked her bandage before she could say a word, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm, full of something she didn't expect, to fear or awe, but curiosity. As though saving a wounded alien royal was no different from patching up a broken machine. "Still alive," he muttered, almost to himself, before handing her a canteen with a cracked metal rim and sitting back on his heels, watching her with the wary eyes of a man who had been alone too long and trusted too little. "You're lucky. I was out hunting," he said, nodding toward the trees beyond the cave. "Most people avoid this ridge. Too many old war machines still buried out there." And as she sipped the water, cool and bitter, she studied him and returned the rough beard, the deep scar across his temple, the old world earth tattoo on his wrist that marked him as Terran, one of the humans who had been scattered and forgotten after the Great Displacement War. And it made no sense to her, because everything she had learned said humans were either extinct or little more than scavengers now. Yet here was one who had saved her life, built a shelter from nothing, and healed wounds that even a trained medic might have missed. She tried to ask his name, but her voice cracked, and he answered anyway, as if expecting the question. "Jack Mercer," he said. "Engineer, I guess used to be, anyway." And when she raised a brow, he added, with a dry chuckle, "For the war threw everything into the dirt." Shale leaned back, exhausted, watching him poke the fire with a stick as he tossed dried roots into the pot and adjusted a tiny solar panel rigged above the mouth of the cave. And she couldn't help but notice the contrast. His tools were basic, even crude, but the way he used them with such skill and precision made her realize he was not some simple forest survivor. He was something else, someone who had lost a future, but learned to shape the world with whatever pieces he had left. After a while, as the morning light spilled across the rocky floor, he finally spoke again. Not looking at her this time, but at the trees. "You were targeted, weren't you?" That wasn't just a crash, and Shale, unsure whether to trust him fully, gave the smallest nod, confirming his suspicion. "They were Arvanthian rebels," she whispered. "They didn't want peace, they wanted chaos." And his jaw tightened, just slightly, as though some old memory had clawed its way to the surface, and he stood slowly, grabbing a battered rifle from a metal rack on the wall and slinging it over his shoulder. "If they shot you down, they'll come looking to finish the job," he said, walking toward the mouth of the cave. "And if they saw you survived, they'll burn the whole ridge to make sure you don't leave it." The thought sent a chill through Shale's spine, worse than the pain in her side, or the sting of betrayal from those who had abandoned her in the crash sand. She asked, "Why help me, then?" "I'm just a stranger." And Jack turned, staring at her, with eyes that suddenly burned like fire, not with anger, but with something deeper, something old and defiant. "You're not just a stranger," he said. "You're a sign they still think humans are gone, that we're weak, forgotten, but I'm still here, okay? And you being here means they made a mistake, and I don't let mistakes walk away without a fight." Those words hung in the air, heavy and true. And as the wind howled again outside, Ciel realized that this man, this unexpected human, had become something far more dangerous than a soldier or a survivor. He had become a spark, and if she stayed by his side, that spark might ignite something the galaxy had long tried to bury. Later that evening, as the shadows grew long and the fire crackled low, "Okay," showed her the perimeter traps he had light, a mix of laser tripwires, sonic alarms, and crude explosive charges made from reprogrammed mining drones. Though she was impressed, she also felt uneasy, because it meant he had been preparing for something, or maybe he just always expected danger to return. Either way, when night finally fell and the stars blinked above the trees, Shale didn't sleep, not fully, because now her fate was tied to this man with fire in his eyes, and she didn't yet know whether that fire would save her or consume everything around him. The wind was cold and sharp as it swept through the trees above the cave, stirring the leaves like whispers in the dark. And Jack Mercer stood just outside the entrance, his eyes on the sky, where a faint, metallic glint moved slowly across the clouds, too high for a bird, too steady for natural flight. And the moment he saw it, his face changed, his mouth set in a hard line, and he stepped back inside the cave where Shale was resting, her side still tender from the wound, but healing faster than expected. She looked up when she saw the look on his face and sat up with effort, pain flashing in her eyes, but her voice steady as she asked, "What is it?" And Jack simply pointed upward and said, "They found you." And those 3 words were like a stone dropping into deep water, no splash. Just wait, pulling everything down. He grabbed his rifle, checked the charge, and pulled on a belt of small, handcrafted devices that looked like grenades but hummed with strange light. And as Shale struggled to her feet, leaning against the wall, she asked, "Can we run?" And Jack shook his head, already moving to the far side of the cave, where a set of camouflaged doors opened into a narrow passage, hidden by hanging roots and vines. "Not far," he said. "They'll have drones sweeping the area, heat trackers, movement sensors if we're lucky. We got an hour, maybe less, before boots hit the ground." And the way he moved, quick, focused, calm, told her this wasn't new to him. He had done this before, maybe many times, and though she didn't say it out loud, she was grateful this strange human had found her and not someone else. Outside, a high-pitched whine echoed faintly, and Jack turned his head sharply, eyes narrowing as he said, "They're scanning low-altitude sweeps. They want to flush you out, not kill you right away." And the way he said it sent a chill through Shale's chest, because she understood what that meant. Capture, interrogation, and then execution, far from any witnesses. She followed him through the tunnel, the light behind them growing dim as they moved deeper underground. The walls rough and narrow, but every turn marked by symbols scratched in stone, human marks. It's clear but crude, guiding them through a maze Jack had built over years. Finally, they emerged into another chamber, smaller than the cave, but better hidden, and Jack set down his rifle and opened a panel in the wall, revealing a control board made from a mix of salvaged Arvanthian tech and old Terran wires, color-coded, dented but alive with flickering lights. And as he powered it up, a hologram blinked to life above it, showing a rough map of the ridge, with red dots spreading like blood along its western edge. "They're landing in squads," he said, mostly to himself. "One up the north path, flanking from the south. They're not wasting time." And Shale, watching the map, said softly, "They want to erase me, like I never existed." And Jack turned to her with a grim nod and added, "They're good at that, but so am I." He handed her a small device, flat silver, marked with an old Terran symbol that she didn't recognize, told her to press it only if she was cornered, because it would trigger a flash pulse strong enough to blind any scanner or sensor for 5 seconds, which might be the difference between life and death. Then, without another word, he turned back to the panel and activated the perimeter defense's silent alarms set in a grid around the outer ring of the forest, ready to alert him of movement with a subtle vibration in the band on his wrist. The system came online. The first buzz hit 1, then 2, then 5 pulses in quick succession, enough to confirm Jack's fear. They were surrounded. He looked at Shale, who stood tall, despite her injury, and said, "Stay close. Keep low. Tia, and if I tell you to run, don't argue." And though she wanted to protest, she was a princess. Not some refugee. She said nothing, because she knew pride wouldn't keep her alive out here. They moved together through another tunnel, this one narrower and steeper, till they reached a rocky outcrop where Jack had set up a sniper's perch with a clear view of the southern approach. Crouching behind the stone, he aimed his rifle through a gap and waited, eyes locked on the tree line, breath steady, hands still as death hand. Then he saw them, 3 figures in black armor, Arvanthian design, smooth and cold. Faces hidden by reflective visors, moving like shadows between the trees, scanning as they advanced, and one of them paused, raised a hand, and pointed directly toward the cave. Jack didn't wait. He squeezed the trigger, and the silent crack of the rifle broke the stillness as the lead soldier dropped. A hole cleaned through his helmet, followed by a blinding flash as one of Jack's traps activated, sending smoke and shrapnel into the second squad's path. Chaos erupted below. And Jack grabbed Shale's arm and pulled her back as shouts and weapons fire echoed through the forest. Green beams flashing through the smoke, slicing trees and earth alike. Jack moved fast, leading her through narrow gaps, behind thick trees, every step precise. His knowledge of the terrain giving them the edge as they slipped through blind spots and evaded patrols. But the enemy was smart. They adapted quickly, flanking from angles Jack hadn't expected, cutting off exit paths. And by the time they reached the old Combs Tower, half buried under vines and rust, they were nearly surrounded. Jack shoved open the door and pulled Shale inside, locking it behind them, and turned to the panel on the wall where ancient wires still hummed faintly with stored energy. "If I can reroute power, I can send a burst, just one to scramble their sensors for a few minutes," he said, working quickly, fingers flying over mismatched buttons, sparks flying as circuits hissed and popped. Hand outside, footsteps crunched over leaves. Too close now, too many of them. Shale raised the flash pulse device, but Jack stopped her, his hand firm on her wrist, knee, and shook his head. "Not yet," he whispered. "We only get one shot." Then the console beeped, and Jack hit the override switch, flooding the tower with a pulse that crackled through the air like static thunder, frying short-range sensors and forcing the enemy to fall back in confusion. He kicked open the back hatch, and they ran, weaving through the smoke and flickering lights. Jack using his traps to stall the squads just long enough to keep them moving trip mines, shock plates, even collapsing tunnels, all designed to delay, never to kill, because Jack knew better than to think he could win a full fight, not against trained Arvanthian assassins. By the time they reached the cliff's edge, dawn was breaking, and the golden light spilled over the valley below, painting everything in warm colors that felt wrong after such a long, cold night. Behind them, the ridge was burning, smoke rising from the trees. The remains of Jack's home, now lost in the flames of battle, and yet he didn't stop to mourn it. He looked at Shale, bruised and tired, but still standing, and said, "This isn't over. They'll keep coming." And Shale, breathless, asked, "Then what do we do?" And Jack turned his eyes to the eastern horizon, where the ruins of something ancient waited, an old site he had found years ago, but never dared explore until now. One that might hold answers, or just more danger, and, he said, "We go where they won't follow." And, without waiting, he led the way, his steps steady despite the loss behind them. Because Jack Mercer was not just surviving anymore, he was fighting back. And somewhere deep in his heart, the fire she had seen in his eyes was burning hotter than ever, ready to light a path through the darkness ahead. The path eastward was rough and silent, carved between thick trees and moss-covered stones. The morning sun hidden behind dark clouds as Jack and Shale moved carefully through the forgotten land where few dared to walk. Their steps quiet, their eyes sharp, and their thoughts full of unanswered questions that grew heavier with every mile they traveled. Jack had said the ruins were ancient, older than the war, older than the empires now fighting across the stars. And as they walked deeper into the forest, Shell noticed the trees began to change, taller, darker, and twisted in ways that made them seem almost alive, as if they were watching from above, holding their breath while strangers crossed through their ancient domain. They said nothing for a while, each locked in their own thoughts, but when they finally reached the edge of a long, dry riverbed filled with broken stone and rusted metal, Jack stopped and pointed to a hill that rose just beyond it, half hidden by fog and shadow, where something large and unnatural loomed. Shale followed his gaze and saw it to a structure like a collapsed dome, wide and deep, made from a dark material that shimmered faintly beneath the grime and vines. And Jack said softly, "That's it, the old bunker I found it once when I was running from a patrol, but I didn't go inside." And Shale, already stepping forward, said, "Then maybe we'll find answers there now." Her voice, low but strong, despite the ache in her legs and the sting of old pain in her side. They crossed the riverbed carefully, stepping over bones, some human, some not tanned. Shale couldn't help but feel a deep unease creeping into her heart, as if the ruins were not just forgotten, but protected by something ancient and unseen. The entrance was half collapsed, a narrow gap just wide enough for them to slip through. And inside, the air was cold and thick with dust, the walls lined with cracked panels and long dead lights. But here and there strange symbols still glowed, faintly etched into the stone like scars from another age. Jack moved with care, checking each corner, scanning for traps or defenses. And Shell followed close behind, her fingers brushing the strange walls, wondering who had built this place and why it had been left to rot. They passed through halls filled with broken machines and shattered screens, symbols from a time before her people ruled the stars. And as they reached the central chamber-wide circular room with a raised platform in the middle, they stopped, their eyes drawn to the figure standing in the center. Not a person, but a projection, flickering and broken, of a tall woman in human uniform. Her face lined with age, her eyes fierce and full of sadness. She began to speak in a language Shell didn't understand, but Jack D'Olterin, rough and direct hand, he listened as the figure warned of something called Project Echo, a secret effort made in the final days of Earth's fall. Planned to seed the galaxy with hidden bunkers like this one, each containing data, technology, and sometimes people frozen in stasis, meant to rebuild humanity if all else failed. Jack's face grew pale as the projection faded, leaving silence behind, and Shell asked what it meant, what this echo was meant to do, and Jack whispered, It means we were never supposed to disappear. We were meant to come back, stronger." And the weight of it sank into the air around them like gravity, too big to understand all at once. Then Shell noticed something else, a panel near the far wall, still active, blinking slowly with pale blue light. Tanned as she touched it, the floor beneath them trembled and began to lower, revealing a hidden room below filled with cryopods, most broken or empty, but one still intact, its glass covered in frost. And inside was a young girl, human, with pale skin and long dark hair, floating weightless inside the fluid, her face peaceful as if dreaming, and Jack stared at her with wide eyes, whispering, "She's not just anyone, she's the daughter of General Khan, the one who led Earth's final defense." And Shell asked how he could know that, and Jack replied, "I saw her face in the old war files. They said she died when the last station fell. But she didn't. She was hidden." And suddenly, everything began to shift in Shell's mind. 'Cause if humans had planted seeds like this across the stars, it meant their fall had never been final. It had only been the beginning of something deeper, something planned. Before they could say more, a sharp beep echoed from Jack's wristband. One of his motion traps had triggered back near the entrance, and both of them froze, knowing that the enemy had followed them somehow, faster than expected. And now, the narrow tunnels would become a death trap if they didn't act fast. Jack pulled a small case from the wall, filled with memory cores and data slates, and handed it to Shale with urgency in his eyes, saying, "This is proof if we don't make it. Someone needs to know what's here." And she nodded, gripping the case tightly as he moved to block the doorway with an energy pulse mine, then pulled her into a narrow side tunnel that spiraled upward toward a vent at the surface. As they climbed, the air grew hotter, the sounds of distant footsteps and harsh voices echoing behind them, and Shale realized that the people chasing her weren't just rebels anymore. They were hunting something else now, something bigger than a wounded princess. At the top, they emerged into light, crawling from beneath an old tree where the bunker's upper vent had been hidden by roots. And Jack covered it again quickly, then motioned for her to run. They moved quickly through the forest, Jack using the rising mist to their advantage, slipping between shadows and old stone, every step taking them farther from the bunker. And as they ran, Shale couldn't shake the feeling that the truth they had found was not something her people would want, revealed not now, not ever, because if humans were meant to rise again, it would shake the balance of power across every system. When they finally stopped to catch their breath near a small waterfall, Jack checked the sky and muttered, "They'll keep coming now. They know what we found." And Shale looked at the case in her hands, its surface glowing faintly, and asked, "What if we give it to someone else, someone who can spread it?" But Jack shook his head, grim and tired, and said, "The moment they know we have it, they'll burn entire worlds to stop it from spreading." Koshi had seen what fear looked like, and what they had now this knowledge would terrify more than just her enemies. It would terrify the rulers, the empires, the powerful who thought they had buried the past for good. Night fell again, and they found shelter in a small cave near the cliffside. This one, shallow and dry, where they could hide without risk of being trapped, and there, under the soft light of alien stars, Shale asked Jack something she had wondered since the start. "Why are you still fighting after all this time?" And he was quiet for a moment before answering, "Because they thought they could erase us," he said. "But they were wrong. As long as I breathe, I'll make sure they remember." And though the fire in his eyes still burned, it was softer now, touched with something almost like hope. And Shale knew then that she wasn't just traveling with a man trying to survive. She was walking beside the first ember of something new, something buried deep beneath war and lies, now rising again into the light. And whatever came next, they would face it together, carrying the truths of the past into a future no one had expected. The sky above Hollow Crater was dark, even in daylight, the thick smoke and low clouds turning the world into a gray battlefield waiting for fire. And Jack stood near the edge of the cliff, staring down into the wide, open basin below, where once water had flowed, but now only rock and ash remained. It's a place so old that no maps marked it anymore, but it was where he had planned to make his final stand, the one place left where he could face what was coming without hiding. Stied, holding the memory case tight against her chest, Cod, her eyes scanning the horizon, knowing that the ones chasing them were close, now closer than ever, and this time they would not stop until both she and Jack were dead, or worse. After escaping the ruins, they had traveled quickly, using forgotten trails in deep woods to throw off pursuit, but they always felt eyes watching, always heard sounds in the night, and now there was nowhere else to run, which was why Jack had led them here. Hollow Crater, a place full of echoing wind and jagged rocks, but also full of traps and hidden paths he had prepared long ago when he first started planning for a day like this. A day when the enemy would come, not just for him, but for something far more important. As the wind howled low, like a warning whispered from the earth, Jack began placing his final defenses mines, buried beneath loose stones. Motion-sensitive flares, wired to branches, and energy cells linked to ancient war scrap he had once dragged. Here, piece by piece, forgotten weapons from forgotten battles, all waiting to be used one last time. Shell helped where she could, though her movements were slower now. Strength not fully returned, but her eyes burned with quiet fire, and her voice was steady when she asked, "How many will come?" And Jack, checking the last trap, replied, "All of them. This time they're not hunting us, they're coming to erase us." And both of them knew it was true, for the message from the bunker had been sent before they left. A pulse signal too small to trace quickly, but enough to reach someone out there who still believed in the old cause. And once that signal had gone out, everything changed, because now it was no longer just about protecting Shale or keeping the memory case hidden. It was about making sure the truth could not be buried again. The sun faded behind the clouds as the first scout drones arrived. Black metal shapes buzzing quietly over the trees, scanning the area with green beams. But Jack was ready. He activated a jammer built from old tech and scrap, and one by one, the drones fell from the sky, their circuits fried before they could send back coordinates. It was a small victory, but it bought them time, maybe hours, and in that time they rested, drank water from a nearby stream, and waited for the storm they knew would come. As night fell, distant lights appeared in the skydrop ships, small and fast, designed for combat, descending in silent formation above the forest edge. And Shell looked up, whispering. They brought the Black Flame unit, and Jack, recognizing the name, nodded grimly, because the Black Flame was not a rumor, was a name given to the elite Arvantian strike force, used only in the darkest missions. A group trained to destroy and disappear, and now they were here, which meant whoever had sent them was powerful and afraid. Jack checked his rifle again, loaded the last power cells into the weapon, and positioned himself on a high ledge above the crater, his field of fire wide and deadly. Shale stayed lower in a narrow cave hidden behind thorn bushes and thick stone, the memory case beside her, her fingers resting on the small blaster Jack had given her with strict instructions to use it only as a last resort. Hours passed in silence until movement began slow at first. The sound of armored boots on rock, the flicker of cloaked figures moving just beyond the reach of moonlight. And then it began, sudden and sharp, with a flash of green light from a plasma bolt striking the rock near Jack's perch, followed by the crack of his rifle firing back, dropping the first attacker before the rest scattered into cover. The battle grew from there, spreading like fire across the crater edge as Jack used every trap, every rock, every piece of terrain to slow them down. Mines exploded. Shocking traps fired bursts of energy, and hidden charges brought boulders crashing down on those trying to flank him, but they kept coming, relentless and cold, their black armor gleaming like shadow as they moved with deadly grace. Jack fought like a man who had already lost everything and was fighting only to protect what still mattered, his hands moving fast, his aim never missing. But the numbers were against him, and soon they began to push forward, reaching the lower edge of the crater where Shale was hidden, and as she heard footsteps above her cave, she held her breath, praying they would pass, but one of them stopped, scanning the area with a deep hum. And Shale had no choice. She pressed the activation button on the memory case, sending a final locked signal burst high into orbit. And then she aimed the blaster at the cave mouth and waited. Just as the soldier stepped through the bushes, a distant sound echoed from the sky, louder than thunder, sharper than any engine ant. A new light split the clouds as a ship unlike any Shale had ever seen descended fast, burning through the sky like a falling star and landing hard on the far side of the crater. Its hull marked with symbols from the old Earth defense lines, long thought lost. The shockwave stunned both sides, and the attackers paused as a ramp opened on the ship, and a squad of human soldiers in matte gray armor poured out. Weapons ready, led by a woman with a scar across her face and fire in her voice, who shouted, "Stand down or die," and the battle turned instantly as the newcomers opened fire, striking with precision, covering Jack's position and forcing the Black Flame soldiers to fall back. Jack, shocked, but not wasting the chance, scrambled down the slope and reached Shale's cave just as she emerged, blinking in the sudden light. And he pulled her to her feet, saying, "They got the message, they came," and Shale nodded, eyes wide, as the woman with the scar approached, helmet off, revealing hard eyes and silver streaks in her hair as she said, "I'm Commander Wren of the Terran Echo Fleet. We received your signal. We're here to finish what was started." And Shale felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not from the battle, but from the truth now standing before her. Humanity had not only survived in secret, they had rebuilt, reorganized, and were ready to fight again. The last of the Black Flame was retreating now, some captured, some fleeing. Their mission failed. And as the crater grew quiet again, Jack sat beside a broken ledge and looked at the rising sun, tired but alive. And when Shale sat beside him, she asked, "Is it over?" And he shook his head slowly and said, "No, but it's finally beginning." And far above, in orbit, dozens of hidden signals began to activate, old bunkers waking from long silence, each one a piece of a larger plan. And across the stars, those who had once ruled without question now felt the ground shift as whispers of Terran return spread. And it all began here, in the hollow place where a human and an alien princess had made their stand together. The world had changed since the battle at Hollow Crater, and the stars above no longer felt as distant as they once had. For now, they carried whispers of a return, of a truth long buried but rising again. And in the heart of it all stood two figures: one, a human soldier marked by war and loss, and the other, an alien princess once hunted by her own kind, now walking freely through halls that echoed with the sound of rebuilding. Shale stood near the wide observation window of the newly restored outpost floating above Virulon, her eyes on the broken blue planet below where she had nearly died, the place where she met Jack and where the tide had begun to shift. The memory case had done its work, unlocking old codes and calling hidden fleets out of silence. And now, small Terran bases blinked to life on forgotten moons and secret stations, guided by voices thought lost to time, all of them answering the calico. Fleet rising from the ashes, with stories of honor, betrayal, and survival whispered through every corridor. Jack entered the room quietly, dressed in simple armor, now marked with the seal of the new alliance, his steps steady, though his shoulders still carried the weight of everything they had seen. And Shale turned to him, her expression calm but thoughtful, asking softly, "Do you think they'll accept it?" And Jack looked out at the stars for a long moment before answering, "Some will, some won't, but it doesn't matter. We're not asking anymore." And those words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, for the new order was not something waiting for permission. It was already forming, shaped by old truths and new alliances. And neither the Arvanthian Empire nor the remaining human colonies could ignore it now. Across systems, word spread of the princess who had turned against her own war council, ken of the human who had saved her when no one else would. And though many doubted at first, thinking it was a tale told to stir rebellion, the facts became harder to deny when ships began to vanish from the Empire's borders and Terran tech started appearing in rebel hands. Advanced systems, once thought destroyed, now working again with strange precision. Shale had spent the last week in talks with her father's former Alisum, curious, some afraid, some openly angry that she still lived, but none of them could ignore the rising power behind her. And more than once, she had to remind them that the alliance she now stood with was not a threat to peace, but a challenge to tyranny. Jack, meanwhile, had taken a different path, working alongside Commander Wren and the remnants of the Echo Commanders, helping train a new generation of soldiers who knew nothing of Earth's fall, but everything of what it meant to stand and fight when the odds said run. And every day, more recruits arrived, humans, yes, but also deserters from alien fleets, smugglers, and even AI pilots who had once served the great houses, but now answered only to truth. The station, once dark and lifeless, buzzed with activity, now ships being repaired, supplies moving through long-dead systems, and meetings held behind closed doors where plans were drawn not just for defense, but for change, deep and lasting. And it was in one such meeting that Shell found herself one evening, standing before a room filled with voices from every corner of known space, each one different but focused, as she said, "This is not about revenge, it's about balance. My people built an empire through fear, but it cannot last, not while others rise." And though a few scoffed, more nodded, 'cause they had seen the same thing. Change was coming, whether anyone liked it or not. Outside, in deep orbit, the first new Alliance fleet gathered, a mixture of old Terran designs and alien ships painted with the crest of the New Order, ready to move at a moment's notice. And Jack watched them from the launch bay, remembering the days when he fought alone, a fugitive soldier with no one left to trust. And now he stood among leaders, his name known across systems, but still the same man inside, driven not by glory, but by the promise he had made to a dying friend long ago. Never let them erase us. As the weeks passed, tensions grew, with the Empire sending emissaries, cloaked in false smiles, offering peace in exchange for silence. But Shell saw through them, and so did Jack. And when the last emissary threatened to reveal the fleet locations in exchange for her exile, she stood and said clearly, "Then tell them we are not hiding." And the message was sent not in words, but through a coordinated broadcast images of the ancient bunkers, data recovered from the memory case, and a full declaration of the Alliance's existence, signed by both Terran Command and the Princess of Revanthia. And the effect was immediate. Systems on the edge of Imperial rule began to rise. Small uprisings backed by strange new weapons and faster-than-light relays. And though the Empire responded with force, it quickly became clear that they could not put out every fire, not when the wind had changed. One night, after a long day of planning, Shale sat with Jack on the outer ring of the station, where stars seemed to burn just out of reach. And she asked, "Do you ever think we'll stop running?" And Jack smiled, a rare thing still, and said, "We stopped the moment we stood at the crater." And she believed him. For now, their cause had roots and people and vision, not just to fight, but to build. But it was not without cost. Commander Wren was killed in a strike on a relay moon, her ship ambushed by a ghost fleet still loyal to the old order. And her loss struck deep, for she had been one of the first to believe. And at her memorial, Shale spoke of courage, not found in armor or rank, but in choosing the harder path when the easier one offered comfort. And still the Alliance grew, fueled by faith and proof, with more bunkers uncovered, more tech restored, and even whispers of surviving Earth-born AI units reawakening in deep space, ready to lend their knowledge to a future they once believed lost. In time, the Empire offered a summit, not a trap this time, but a real offer to talk, and Shale agreed, against many warnings. Traveling with Jack to a neutral station, carved into a dead moon, where the walls still bore scars from wars past. And when she stood before the high table, facing admirals and rulers who once called for her execution, she said, "I do not want war, but I will not return to a silence that cost us everything." And they listened, not because they feared her, but because they saw the fire behind her words. Hey, and in Jack's silence beside her, a promise that any move against her would not end quietly. They left the summit with no formal treaty, but with space to breathe. And sometimes that is all change needs, a moment to take root. Later that night, Shale walked through the command deck of the station, watching young recruits learn the layout of the stars, and old soldiers share stories with those who once called them enemies, and she felt something deep and unfamiliar in her chest, hope not blind, not perfect, but real, born from everything they had lost and everything they had chosen to build instead. Jack found her there, quiet and still, and asked, "What now?" And she looked out at the stars and said, "Now we write our own future." And together they stood, side by side, the last ember of an old world and the first spark of something new. Not just survivors, but founders of an order shaped not by bloodlines or flags, but by truth. And the courage to stand, even when standing meant facing the impossible, because in the end, it had never just been about the crash, or the crater, or the war. It had always been about the promise that even in the darkest night, one spark could start a fire. And now, that fire was spreading,